Welcome to everybody, and thank you to come to this GNRD side events. Let me first introduce our speakers from this evening, Mr. Brent, a lawyer, and Mr. Gul from the Center for Research and Security Studies in Pakistan. Today we are here to speak about good governance, justice and other cases. Good governance. We all expect to live under a good governance regime, of course. But what is this good governance? Transparency, democracy, respect of laws, equality, and efficiency. That were just the most important and may good governance concept. That is an academic definition, of course, because the good governance must be applied from the top to the bottom from all our organizations, from government to civil society, as citizens. But this is perhaps utopia, perhaps, and our discussion going to prove or improve my point of view. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Gul.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here after some time. It's an honor to be here, actually, to be invited by GNRD on a subject which is very close to my heart. I share personally a number of things that the team GNRD and President Deep is trying to persevere with. The good governance, justice, and other contexts, the title itself is sort of provocative. But I think a lot of what we see today in our part of the world is directly related to how certain national and international factors have impacted governance, justice, and issues such as money laundering. The debate basically, I think, has intensified, particularly in the context of the 9/11 terrorist incidents, and then the unbridled, unquestioned legislation in major countries, which also then enabled these countries to launch interventions, first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. Then we saw the unraveling of the idea of the so-called Arab Spring in the name of democratic rights, which I think has also ended up as sort of a disappointment to a certain extent. Disappointment because there were certain ideas which external forces tried to impose on societies which are unique in their own way, which have a different socio-political milieu. And the Afghanistan and Iraq examples are, I think, the best manifestation of how foreign recipes can lead countries down a disastrous path. Today we see this global refugee crisis and unparalleled exodus of people, mostly from North African countries, from Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sure you all know how more than 2,500 people have died at sea this year so far. 3,500 died last year. And between January 2014 to date, at least 30 ships were capsized or were captured with a lot of illegal immigrants fleeing from the conflict-riven areas. Now, this is one major manifestation of how the northern part of this globe has dealt with the issue of governance, with the rule of law, which we also call nation building and democracy promoting projects in different parts of the world. If we look at the World Bank, look at the United Nations, or look at what Kofi Annan said in 2004 about governance, about corruption. Kofi Annan, to sum it up, said that corruption is an insidious plague that has a wide range of corrosive effects on societies. It undermines democracy and the rule of law, leads to violations of human rights, distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. It's a longer quote. I'll finish this here. Now, a study of World Bank funded projects suggests that if there is high corruption in an aid recipient country, the probability of project success, of institutional development impact, and of long-term sustainability of the investment is much lower than in countries with better governance. Now, this is directly correlated with how Western nations have been supporting developing nations with money, with funds for rule of law, for better governance, for access to justice. And what we see in most of our countries, developing nations, is a trend that is contrary to the ideals of the rule of law. You know, the United Nations has, I think, 19 indicators for rule of law. And transparency, merit, strict monetary controls, freedom of speech, they're all part of those indicators of rule of law. But the question that confronts us all is whether the international NGOs or NGOs and the Western governments in particular really have control over the implementation of all these ideals, particularly in our countries, in our part of the world. And also the question whether geopolitical interests, geopolitical considerations trump and trample the basic ideals of democracy and the rule of law. Now, if we look at why has this happened, what are the drivers of bad governance, injustice, and corruption in developing countries? I would say that there are two major drivers for the kind of conditions that countries of the South are in particular. One is compromised, self-serving ruling elites in developing nations, and the other one is geopolitics. As for the ruling elites of these countries, they exploit existing socio-political and tribal structures, which lack democratic values and suffer from poor rule of law. Why Nations Fail? It's a book by Darren Echimoglu and James Robinson. This book elaborates the phenomena in greater detail. The authors explain how the ruling elites in developing countries emasculate governance structures through unholy alliances with one another and turn the law to their advantage. How the mighty, influential civilian and military elites work in a complementary way to push their personal agenda. And here, the second factor, that is geopolitics, weighs in very, very heavily. And that's why I say that geopolitical interests, and implicit support for corruption is equal to bad governance. And we have many examples for that. Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan itself. And these examples underline that geopolitical interventions and implicit foreign involvement can essentially tear down traditional pillars of socio-political stability in a particular society, and thus adversely impact the development of good governance structures. For example, in the case of Iraq and Libya, intervening states assessed new incoming administrations on whether they would advance their foreign interests rather than whether these new regimes possessed the capability of truly serving their country. I'm not saying this. These views are by Lina Khatib, an Arab origin American writer. She wrote this article in the Foreign Policy magazine recently. And her views basically resonate a global sentiment about geopolitical interests and the havoc they have played with developing nations. Lina Khatib says that United States, European Union, China, Russia, and other actors have for long continued to support monarchies in the Gulf and the status quo in many countries, prioritizing economic benefits such as energy and trade deals over democracy, transparency, and better standards of human rights. I'm not going to Iraq. That's a different story. You all are very familiar with that. But I'll rely more on some facts and figures from Afghanistan, which is next door, and which has had adverse impact on Pakistan itself. The United States has, since 2002, for instance, provided over $110 billion to Afghanistan. It's both military assistance, security assistance, and development aid. $110 billion, but mostly it's aid. Unfortunately, despite this massive aid package, Afghans have not been able to develop effective institutional structures of good governance. You'd be surprised to know that the Afghan army, despite this engagement with the Americans and the oversight by the American and NATO troops, even today does not have electronic payrolls. So they don't have electronic records. The one we had imagined and expected that because the Americans are there, they are building the police and the army of Afghanistan, they would put in place mechanisms to check corruption, for instance. But until 2 months ago, there were no electronic rolls for the 350,000 plus Afghan National Security Forces, which means you have a lot of pilferage which can go undetected. Now, I say that while Afghan politicians themselves, particularly Hamid Karzai, the former president, may have been responsible for these outcomes, the United States and its allies share an equal responsibility for what has happened in Afghanistan and why this nation-building project that began under the Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001 December has failed. The latest example of this came in the New York Times. Now, this is the positive side of this Western societies, if you may want to put it so, that the New York Times came out with a shocking story. The story is about a few Marines who complained to their superiors that the Afghan army officers were molesting young boys. They pick them up from the street, bring them to the barracks, to the garrison, and molest them. And these sergeants were hearing these boys scream. They reported it to their supervisors, and the supervisor says, well, the bigger picture is fighting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and it wasn't to stop molestation of young boys. So please look the other way. This is what has appeared in the New York Times a few days ago. So here you can very clearly connect the dots that how geopolitical considerations trump the consideration for human rights, fundamental human rights, on which we invest, the Western nations invest so much. Then comes the issue of money laundering and corruption, and GNRD is facing it. To my surprise, before coming here, I sent a couple of messages on Twitter saying that I'm speaking here along with other people, and there were 2 messages saying, oh, you don't know? The GNRD is under investigation for suspicion of money laundering. So then I responded that maybe, the country's mere suspicion basically doesn't make somebody culprit, and secondly, the countries who are hosting our ex-rulers with a lot of money, they need to redefine money laundering. So now the OECD had its own definition of money laundering, but I can quote you an example of how, in a very systematic way, the Western nations have colluded with their interlocutors in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, for instance, to condone, ignore the money that had been stolen in these countries and then parked here in Switzerland, in New York, and London. I had a meeting with an official of Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. This is called SIGAR, Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. So this was in May early this year. And this guy says that, we know who has made how much money and where the money is parked. So he was talking about Afghanistan. But he says geopolitics binds our hands. We cannot do much. So they are all aware of how much money has been plundered and stolen. Similar is the case with a lot of Pakistani leaders, ex-presidents, ex-prime ministers who have properties in London, in the most expensive areas, downtown Manhattan, in Dubai. Nobody asked them as to where they brought these millions that they have invested there in these countries. So I think we really need to do something about, push the idea of redefining money laundering. Our countries are condemned for corruption. But those who are involved in corruption, they bring their money, park it here in the West. They are not condemned. They remain the partners. They remain friends. So this is a big paradox in international politics that we all need to fight. Then, funding terrorism. How these unholy alliances in Iraq and Afghanistan, the alliance against Syria, they have given birth to entities, and how the Western world, the United States, Great Britain, they have been sort of indirect facilitators for the emergence of these Godzillas, which was Al-Qaeda, which is Al-Nusra Front, which is ISIS. This has been put yesterday by President Obama, by the State Department, and has been designated as a global terrorist group yesterday. But probably you read that a few days ago, the Pentagon admitted that a group of US-trained Syrian rebels had handed over most of their weapons, ammunition and equipment to Al-Qaeda's affiliate in the country, the Al-Nusra Front. Why? Because they were looking for a safe passage from an area where they had been surrounded. So it has again highlighted this phenomena that if you're relying on non-state actors to pursue and peddle your own vested interests, you may end up dealing with Godzillas. You are with the same, and who are hitting back at you. So this is like an indirect support for funding of terrorist groups. So I think this has caused quite a storm in Washington after the New York Times, I think, or the Washington Post came out with this story. Now, perhaps you remember that the United States had announced $500 million for training jihadists a couple of years ago. And the idea was to fight and remove Bashar al-Assad. Now, I'm not going to the merits or demerits of Bashar al-Assad, but the idea of creating smaller Godzillas, non-state actors, arming them, equipping them, in the hope of unleashing them against your political rivals in a particular country, is disastrous. Has proved to be disastrous in Iraq, has proved to be disastrous in Syria. Libya, look, I visited Libya in 2006 for about a week. I found it very peaceful. But look what has happened. Somebody was telling me, I think Bent was telling me, that it was Norwegian bombers, the American bombers were used to soften the government positions in Tripoli before the opposition could march in after a struggle of 1 year. So this is, how much time do I have?
20 minutes. 5
Okay.
minutes.
Yeah, okay. Now, to this context, that how, the Al-Nusra or the IS, although they have been designated, how the money that was spent, the funds that was spent on them are now hitting back. This US is now trying to stitch together a global coalition against IS. So I still wonder, coming from a country which is suffering the consequences of this non-state actors' role in foreign policy, how can now Pakistan willingly become part of this coalition against IS? Now, I was intrigued by a statement from Osama bin Laden, from Barack Obama. You can easily mistake these names, right? Obama and Osama. So, yesterday, I think President Obama told a conference on countering violent extremism that we are pursuing a comprehensive strategy that is informed by our success over many years in crippling the Al-Qaeda core in the tribal regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we are harnessing all of our tools to combat them. I mean, this is such a strange statement that what have they learned in Afghanistan and in Pakistan? They have put this country, they have added to the already so many burning fires in there. They've created many more terrorist organizations. Many of them are freelancers, members of organized crime. Because right now what we see in a lot of these countries is this nexus between the militancy, political or religious, and the organized crime. And another important thing, that while Obama was saying this, the State Department designated these 10 individuals and organizations as global terrorists. And interestingly, there were 4 British and 3 French citizens among these 10 individuals and groups. Which means that it's a second and third generation jihadists. who have grown up in the very countries who have sponsored jihad and militant military interventions in these countries. So they are basically now tasting their own medicine. So chickens have come home to roost. Then because I'm talking of geopolitics, Barack Obama and Putin also had a spat on Syria, on the issue of Syria 2 days ago. Obama, while addressing this summit, said that extremists in Syria could only be defeated if President Bashar al-Assad stepped down. And this is the only condition they are focused on. In Syria, defeating IS requires, I believe, a new leader, he told the summit. And only a day earlier, he had disagreed with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, because Putin said that President Assad basically was the only hope to defeat extremists. Now, this disagreement over Syria also represents the consequence, this fixation, the fixation on geopolitical considerations by one big country. And in the conclusion, I can say that one of the current challenges in global governance is to redefine the social contract between the state and citizen. In developing and fragile countries in particular, governments need to improve their performance in order to accelerate economic growth, to improve lives of their citizens according to the rule of law. This would only be achieved when elements of good governance, again, rule of law, transparency, accountability, and open government are incorporated across all institutions and policies. Corruption, I say, weakens governance structures. While leaders in developing countries are primarily responsible to curb corruption, in promoting corruption, the broader international community also has a responsibility to support this process. Developed countries should assist poorer countries in the development of institutions and be sensitive to country variations in design and implementation of foreign policies and to different countries' needs. The recipes that they offer for countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq must have a local socio-political context. They must be embedded, anchored in the socio-political traditions of those countries, rather than imposing this Westminster model or the DC model of democracy on these countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gul, to share your analysis. And we note that you understand with you that the external forces try to impose sometimes or import the good governance with all the results that we know today. And in the same way, the money impact is very important on our economic and social life, as money laundering for states and corruption are paradoxically never condemned for states. The geostrategic game are also again a good governance. So the good governance could be a real utopia for us in human rights, perhaps a dream to attempt in the future. I'm turning to Mr. Brandt as a lawyer to get his own analysis and share it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and dear friends and dear organizers. I'm going to say some words on human rights and good governance with a view to Norway. Within the core of human rights is the right of the individual towards the state and the state's obligations towards the individual. And when I'm speaking about individual, I of course include NGOs as a legal entity, as an individual. Of course the obligations are different, and the need for the NGOs are different than for the individual. And we have on human rights, we have what I would call the hard law, and we have the soft law. The hard law is, of course, the prohibition of torture, the freedom of speech, while the soft law is the right to housing, the right to a job, the right to education. So what I'm going to talk about is what I see as the core in the hard law of human rights. The main focus for me is that human rights is a defense for the individual, for the entity, for the NGO, against the government, against the state. I can be beaten up in the street, that is a crime. I can be beaten up by the police in the police station, that is torture, that's a breach of my human rights. So it's not what you are, it's not so much what is happening to you, than who is the perpetrator, who is doing it to you. Of course, the government also have an obligation to see to you that you are not beaten up on the street. But still, the obligation lies on the government, on the state, within the human right context. I also think that the hard core of human right law is what we call jus cogens, that is, it's law in itself. It doesn't have to be written down anywhere, because laws can be changed. We have in Norway a ban on torture. It is in our constitution that torture is forbidden. But of course, Parliament can change that. They can say, well, in certain consequences, in certain situations, a little bit of torture is okay. That's what the Americans did in Guantanamo, with waterboarding and so forth. But in my opinion, that is illegal. Even if you make a new law, you cannot make law against the hard core of human right. That was, in my opinion, the principle after the Second World War, where the Germans, where Nazis were convicted, even though they acted according to the Nazi laws, not against them. So they always said, we acted just after our laws. So, where does that leave us? Well, these hardcore human rights laws are embedded in a lot of texts. They are embedded in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. They are embedded in the UN Covenants from '66 on human rights. For me, it's very practical that they are embedded in the European Human Rights Convention, because the European system has a separate court, so you can go to that court and you can have a verdict that the government has broken basic human rights in its way of treating you. And that is a practical tool. It takes some time, but it is a very practical tool. Where does that leave us in our context? And in the back of my mind is the case against GNRD, of course. We have the provisions of fair trial. What does fair trial mean? I'm coming to that. We have the provision of the right to privacy. That is the right to privacy in your home, in your office. That's related to GNRD, but it's also related to the employees of GNRD. They have also had their privacy invaded. It's the right to freedom, which have a lot of procedural provisions in it, in Article 5 in the European Convention. And if we go to the principle of fair trial, I will point to some points that are, it's in our case, very essential. It is the right to promptly be informed of the accusations against you. That is embedded in the European Constitution, in the CCPR. It's clearly written in Article 9. You are obliged to have information of the accusation against you promptly. It is the principle of equality of arms. The government, the police are not to be in a better position legally than you are. You are to be weighted on the same way, and the judge is supposed to be neutral between two equal partners. That's the game. That's the game. And in that context, of course, you have the right to a defense. You have the right to hire a lawyer if you don't want to take the case on yourself. And that lawyer or yourself should be able to be in a position where you can free yourself of the accusation. Also not only be passive, but also be active in the case and saying, I want that and that evidence put forward, I want that and that witness heard, I will have access to those and those documentation. And you have one last provision that is not the least important, and that is the presumption of innocent until proven guilty, which is a principle that comes very clearly into our case. And of course, you can then verbally say you have not been proven guilty, you have not even started a court case, so of course we have not saying that you have done this yet, but then in all other contexts act as if you were guilty. And we have some implications or some incidents that this is happening to GNRD. If time allows, I will come back to that later. So now I've said something about the human right, hardcore human rights provisions, where that affects us. And then the other topic on the agenda is good governance. I'm not going to say so much about that. UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has drafted several documents about it. It has drafted a resolution in 2000, and Mr. Gul has been partly into the topic. It is transparency, that you can see what's happening. It's responsibility of the party of this, of the part of the state. It is accountability, and I would also add, as a for me, very important part in our situation and our discussion, it is the rule of law. And I will try to come into what does the rule of law imply and what does the rule of law mean in our case. Well, it means what we have said, a fair trial. That's the first thing. A fair trial, to be promptly informed of the accusations and the presumption of innocence. You are not convicted before you are convicted. The presumption of innocence is, in this case, in my view, not upheld. It has been tampered with, as I said earlier. But in presumption of innocence, it is not written in the nature of human that it is to be so. If we go back some to the Dark Ages, before the Age of Enlightenment, which is not so very far away, it was the opposite. You were guilty until you proved yourself innocent. And it went so far that if you were suspected of being a witch, they tied you up and throw you into the river. If you were drowned, you were innocent. If you were floating up, you were guilty. So the principle of innocence is very important to uphold to its fullest, and not to be influenced. And here we are influenced. We are influenced in the media. We are influenced by rumors. The principle is not upheld, and from my point, it's also speculated in it by the police with their statements to the press. So I will leave the principle and I will try to explain something that I think can be an explanation for the situation we are in, and that is the Norwegian conception of ourselves. We look at ourselves, and no, we look at the map, at the globus, and we find that Norway is on top of the globus. There is no one above us. Every other is below us. So we are on the top of the world. We are the best nation in the Winter Olympic Games. We beat big nations like Russia and USA, and not to mention Swedes and Switzerland. We are the richest country in the world, or at least we like to say that we are the richest country in the world. We are voted the best country to live in the world. So we think ourselves as the best people of the world, with the best system in the world, including the best judiciary in the world. But is that so? Is that true? There has never been a real study into the Norwegian judiciary. I have some international experience, and I find it's frightening bad. I can make a little detour. I know a Dutch appeal court judge. She speaks fluently Norwegian and is in Norway every summer on vacation. She had an EU grant to be a student or to be hospitalized in the Norwegian court. And she wrote a report afterwards, but she said to me, I couldn't read couldn't write what I found because it's too scandalous for me. I never seen a court work in this way. In Holland we do it exactly opposite. And she was shocked, and she had several instances to tell me how shocked she were of the judges' behavior. But the Norwegian judges, if you ask them, well, we are on top of the world. We have a very good legal system. Some minor, we make some mistakes, maybe. In the Norwegian context, this has also been discussed. It hasn't been a university study on it, it hasn't been investigated in, but it has of course been discussed. It was one famous defense lawyer in Norway who then said something about Norwegian judges. He said, I know many of them. Before they became judges, they were very reasonable and sensible legal persons. After they became judges, I don't understand them anymore. I don't know how this happened. I cannot explain to you how this is happened. And he said there must live a troll in the basement of the legal department in Norway, because they are normal when they come in, when they go out they are abnormal. There have been one short investigation lately that is just being published, and that is how does the judges in the Supreme Court of Norway vote when there is a case against the government. And those judges coming from the government tend to vote with the government. So that is an indication that the judiciary in Norway is not independent. It's not any clear links. It's not, you cannot take a phone to the judge and tell him how he's going to vote. That doesn't function. They are not corrupt. They don't take money. So it's something in their head. There is a troll in the basement of the legal department in Norway. So in Norway we can see the court as a tool in the government, in the states, controlling power, and not opposite, not something that is supposed to look into the business with critical eyes, the business of the government. And on this background, that we think we are the best, that we think we have a good legal system in Norway, we have the case of the GNRD. First of all, we have not been informed of the accusation against GNRD. We have not been informed of anything implying an accusation. They have only said money laundering, you are guilty of money laundering because you are guilty of money laundering. Nothing about the place, nothing about the money, nothing how it's done, nothing. And we have seen no documentation. We haven't even seen the paper of accusation. We haven't seen anything. So that is the first, what is a clear breach of the basic human right, the basic rule of law, the basic rule of transparency. There is a wall between us and the police first, but when we went to the court, the judge said, no, you are not entitled to see any documents. No one whatsoever. Not even your own statement you are allowed to see, which is clearly ridiculous. But that shows how, in my view, the court is not independent. And it's not corruption, it is not by a telephone call from the police, it is something in the head of the judge, which is of course very difficult to define. And to me, it's normal, it's what happens, so it's not specific for GNRD, but it's the malfunction of the Norwegian legal system. Of course, when you don't know the accusation against you, there is no equality of arms. Because all the argumentation, all the ammunition, everything is on the police's hand. Nothing is on our side, we have nothing. The only thing we have is to go to the court and complain, which we have done with zero result so far. The case is of course before the appeal court, and after the appeal court we are going to the Supreme Court, and after the Supreme Court we are going to Strasbourg to the European Human Rights Court. But that takes time. When you don't know what you're accused to, you don't have the possibility to have a defense, because you don't know what the accusation. How can you defend yourself when you don't know the enemy, when you don't know the accusation? It's a breach of the basic human right law. How can you then, on the next point, free yourself of the accusations? How can you be active and get in documentations that you need to counter the documentation or the accusations that they have when you don't know it? It's impossible. So also on this point there's a breach of the basic human rights. You can not even uphold, in my view, the presumption of innocence. Because when you are put in that position where you cannot speak because you don't know the accusations, the presumption of innocence is also tampered with. I don't know, I can speculate, I have my thoughts, but I don't know how this started, what initiated this situation. But we know so much that we can say it's not local. It's not local. Legally, from a lawyer's point of view, from a criminal lawyer's point of view, things have to take its time. There isn't so much we can do to speed things up. The court works slowly, but of course, if you do things political, that will put pressure on the situation, that will of course change the situation and change the position. So there are things we can do, but that is outside the small or the narrow scope of the legal system. Finally, I will say something about the employees in GNRD, because they are also affected by the situation. The house of the president has been raided, his family has been affected, their rights has also been tampered with, been crushed partly the employees has also been raided, not in their home, but their office has been raided, their personal belonging has been taken away from them, they've been given back, but the police is sitting holding copies of all your papers, of all your passport. What do they need your CV for? What is the point of the police keeping the employees' CVs? Which is a piece of paper, but they have it, and they refuse to give it away. And we asked the court to get the CVs back and said that has nothing to do with the crime, that has nothing to do with the police. And the judge said, no, not at this time. We are not to have it back. The police are going to sit on the CVs of all the employees at the office in Stavanger. So of course all the basic rules for good governance, for civil society, is tampered with in this case. And as I said earlier, for me this is not so surprising. I think it's much more surprising for the people who has been put through it for the first time in their lives. On the other hand, I don't see the situation as black at all. I see the situation quite optimistically. I think we'll come out of this without any scratches at all. My only problem is the time this will take, because it will not be a swift operation. The less the police have of anything, of evidence, of anything, the more time they will use, hoping that something will happen that can make them get rid of the burden the case is. So, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Brand, to have sharing your analysis and your feeling about good governance in Norway. We note that with the GNRD case, we learned that the best country could be out of law with some abnormal comportments when the government, the justice, the police are attacked or are inside the system. So with your analysis of GNRD case and the general context, we understand that good governance is a very high concept and many times used, pronounced from some people to manage the world through medias, and don't apply it as soon as they are in the middle of the case. That we said in France for two hate and two lands. So now it's perhaps time to give the floor and opening the floor, and the first question is for Mr. Deep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jan. I have a comment and I have a question. Of course, in this case, this is some mistake from GNRD side and some criminal from other side. The mistake from GNRD side, I think that when GNRD start, when they work with annual report, when we start to investigate the money for the Norwegian people, how to use outside, when we found a lot of violation in Myanmar and other country, and this money support criminal. And this report, the evidence we have in the office, police refused to back to GNRD. Maybe GNRD make mistake when we found that the Norwegian authority lose in the financial crisis the last time triple what all the people in Norway be as taxation in the last 20 years. Maybe we make mistake. Maybe we make mistake when we go over the red line and we start to have something against terrorism group in the world. Maybe we make mistake when we found that all the time the Norwegian government see we are support the freedom, we are support the people in Gaza, but we found that the 40% of the rocket cast over Gaza, this was Norwegian rocket. Maybe we make some mistake here. Criminal, we have a criminal. This is somebody try to kill human rights organization here. The serious human rights organization coming from nothing, coming to make balance in the world between south and north, east and western. All the violation happen. This is because we have bad government in Norwegian. We don't have any observer system. We don't know where we will make our objection or compliment. We don't have national committee for human rights to control government. The police have free to investigate you all the life without limited. My daughter was in investigation 3 hours. She 10 years. And we don't know with who we will make. Nobody open investigation up to now. A lot of violation. When they take all the evidence from the office, computer, document, nobody give us the list. They attack the office without the decision from the court was from duty judge in the court. And as international human rights organization, they have the same predict the lawyer office have, and you need special procedure. You need minimum 7 judges to make this decision. Nobody asked them. The government in Norway without control. You know why without control? You know why we come to this position? We joking with ourselves. As Norwegian citizen, I am care because the media in Norway not independent. I think somebody used this case to play. We have a crisis situation in Norway. 500,000 persons in Norway in one day, they cannot buy the loan for the bank, and the rent so high in Norway, and the central bank reduced the rent down, and the first news, LOID and GNRD. This is someone used the case as, I think before, they used the media just again GNRD. But what we found in the International Federation for Journalists, that a lot of the media in Norway, the membership was afraid because this media not independent, and they follow the government agenda. Anyway, justice, to fight for justice, this is one of our target, one of our mission. We will continue in this. We will continue in the legal system. Maybe the situation, all the obstacle, all the problem they try to make to GNRD and to stuff to GNRD, maybe this is someone of the price we have to buy in the way. But I am sure the case of GNRD, in the end, if we have goodwill inside to fight and to get justice, will fix and repair a lot in Norway. And we will have, after that, I look and I see in my eyes this is coming in the way GNRD gate. We will find which finger from outside, but in this government to push them to press GNRD. What GNRD do? Nothing. GNRD try to do something for the people, for the human rights. Are somebody happy today? This is around 2 million persons around the world take direct or non-direct service from GNRD in the different 40 countries. And which case we hire today in the world? Not just terrorism issue. We hire right in development. We hire other case nobody speak about. The human rights situation designed with Western thing before. But nobody take our culture as people coming from the South. Nobody care about other rights. We just want to put our experience, not democratic for other country and make non-stable country. This is wrong. This is what GNRD try to do, to make balance. And this was the reason, the real reason, why GNRD in this position. If this is the reason why GNRD in this position, we are brown. We don't care. We will fight in national mechanism, international mechanism, And in the end, the through will coming. And GNRD not glass. If you use hammer with the glass, will shut down. If you use with iron, will make more strong. We will be every day more strong. My question here, two questions, one for Mr. Gul, one for Mr. Ben. Mr. Gul, as what happened with GNRD, what happened today in non-balance in the world, they have right to speak about you. You have bad government. You don't have good government. You don't have right to speak about. And you know the system design in the United Nations. This is justice for the winner, the people winner, the second war. What we can do as civil society to make it change, not government. The government have a lot of calculate and have a lot of care about relation. But the civil society in West and North, how we can do to change something. My question to Mr. Ben, in this case, this is politic intro. And everyone, not just field, the last letter coming from the police side, see this is investigation not happen with academic way, this is in special procedure, and this is clear in this letter, this is politic intro. Why? Was the first case in the media in Norway. This is DNA newspaper, 14 of 16 page was for GNRD. Cover GNRD, and Inarco cover GNRD. And nobody in this system care to still question how we can hire this case to know the truth what happened here. We have the legal system, and we know this is a lot of obstacle, closed door, secret file. We need investigation for 10 years, and if you put angel from the sky under investigation 10 years, you will find some mistake. To attack somebody, to take decision from the court, of course you have logical reason. And the logical reason, we don't know. We don't know. In this case, legal way, I ask, we will follow. Bad or good, we will follow, and we will continue up to we arrive to the European Court for Human Rights. But what about other way? If we have politic intro, how we can move the case to the politic level also in Norway. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the different notes. Mr. Gul, perhaps an answer?
I think the answer is implied in your own observations and your own question. What we can perhaps do as members of civil society, as public intellectuals, is to, you're basically asking whether the developing countries, the South, can impact, can change the Western hegemony of information and of the reform agenda. It's a very difficult task, of course. That's why you're facing so many problems, because it is all of a sudden something has emerged on the scene. GNRD has taken up an agenda which is not in sync with what the major northern countries believe. So, but still, our conduct, I think, must be rooted in hope that we, as members of civil society, have to, in the first place, democratize our own conduct. We have to raise alliances of like-minded people, build on synergies that are basically common to people of different countries, and raise those voices collectively. And that basically means networking as many civil society organizations as possible and synthesize their demands in resolution. And for instance, since you are here heavily represented in Geneva in the Human Rights Council, it's not as powerful as the United States itself, but still it is a huge forum. It provides you with an opportunity to raise your voice. So if the synthesis of the civil society organizations gets through at this forum, that means you have sensitized more people. People who may not agree with you, but at least you are embedding in their minds the other way of looking at things, not just the way that London or Washington would like you to think of the human rights or rule of law, but of the other way. That's why we are gathered here, that giving people the other perspective on rights, on development, on information, on the rule of law. I mean, Bent basically has spoken very aptly about the rule of law, which he said that the GNRD case is a what do you call it? What breach? It's a gross breach of the basic rule of law. So this is what we need to propagate as much as possible.
Thank you. And Mr. Brent, perhaps an answer?
Yeah, I can try. When it comes to the press in Norway, I think they are like a pack of wolves. They hunt in pack, and if one of them can smell blood, he follows that, and everyone else follow the first one. So they hunt in packs. That's a pack. That is the only explanation I can give you. And to the next question, how to get the case or the questions onto a different arena than the Norwegian courts. Well, in one way, this is what we are doing here, I think, but one thought is that the fact that GNRD is an NGO, an international NGO, should be in one way stressed and explored. Not least because Norway has been verbally very in the front of protecting NGOs and trying to get NGOs on the international level to good protection. That has been done, for instance, for NGOs in Russia, where they have criticized Russia for Russia's handling of NGOs. And certainly that Norway is then in a position where that can backfire on them, because they are treating GNRD in a way that an NGO shouldn't be treated, which yourself took some point of. So the fact that GNRD is an NGO should be underlined, and we should explore ways of putting pressure outside the court on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Brandt. Perhaps a second question? Yes, Mr. Dr. Abouzer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bent, Mr. Gul, and Fashil. All of us may know that without good governance, human rights cannot be respected and protected in a sustainable manner. Also, implementation of human rights relies on a conductive and enabling a good environment which assist or insist in some place or country on a political and a good institutions that serves the good governance and serve the rights and take care of all rights. My question is, what is the role of the people in protecting and promotion of good governance as one of the means of protecting of human rights. And if you talk about Norway, I think it is the reputation of Norway. It comes after a huge amount of implementation in good way to protect human rights in all over the world. But the change now on the field, I think that needs the attention of the people, especially that who are well-educated, cultured, and aware about the human rights. This is my question to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abazer, but perhaps Mr. Brandt?
I can try, because this is a question out of my professional area. I'm a lawyer, not a politician. Norway is a good country to live in, of course. And one reason for that is that Norway, up until the Second World War and after the Second World War, was a very poor country. We didn't have many rich people. We didn't have an aristocracy at all. It was a very, very flat society, which of course makes it easy for people to have common interests and speak together, because you don't have the big class diversity. That time is gone. It's not like that anymore. We have the newly rich in Norway. You have a society where you have different interests and emerging of a new class struggle, I think. But still you have the possibility of alerting people in Norway. But I cannot answer you how that should be done in the case of GNRD. One weak point is that GNRD doesn't work inside of Norway, but has its activity outside of Norway. So it's not a well-known organization within Norway, like the Norwegian organization is. But the possibility is there, I think, but I think it will be a difficult task, and I don't have a good answer to.
Perhaps, Mr. Gul, you have part of the answer.
Maybe just part, because I mean, you're talking now from the perspective of Norway, or from the perspective of other Western democracies. You know, as for good governance in our part of the world, in my country, I would say generally, the general rule is that the basic tools for doing so are the freedom of expression, freedom of association, and freedom of action, as guaranteed by the UN Human Rights Charter, by our own constitution. And under that, you have to have these different tiers of governance, whether it's a local government and then a provincial government. So perhaps we are sort of getting there. We're having like local government elections, we have provincial governments. The level of awareness is not that big. Still, we have a very vibrant civil society. We have a very vibrant media practically free for all media. And that a free media, free civil society provides you with the leverage of peddling your way, your views on a particular issue, and it may make the government change its mind or not. It may or may not. But the issue is that a free media does create a lot of awareness. A free social media, civil society does contribute to the discourse on the rule of law, on governance it raises, I think, the levels of awareness. This is what people can do just through civil society organizations, through local government, through political parties. Just keep talking of the issues that are affecting them collectively.
Thank you. I think. Thank you. I think that we have another question at the left. Right.
Hi, my name is Omar Farooq Osman. I'm the Secretary General of the National Union of Smart Journalists, and I'm also the General Secretary of the Eastern African Journalists Association, a member of the International Federation of Journalists. Indeed, I'm very disturbed by the comments on media belittling. And as a journalist, you know, for us, what we first resort is ethical reporting and objective reporting instead of subjective reporting. And always we receive in the media that some of our colleagues do not report ethically, professionally, and they take a partisan side. I wanted to ask the lawyer from Norway, yeah, I know you're not a media person, but when such kind of issues of media misreporting, misinformation exists, there is always sort of media self-regulatory body. Is there such a media self-regulatory body in Norway that looks at ethical journalism practice in terms of reporting, if it's bias, if it is subjective or objective, even if it's defamatory and derogatory, you know, there must be recourse. I'll give you one example in Africa. If such kind of things are happening, we are saying, okay, defamation, we are fighting defamation to be criminalized. Then you come to prosecute the media in the court. Rather than that, we say, look, let's establish free and independent media regulatory bodies, not statutory media regulatory bodies, because statutory media regulatory bodies, then we end up what we are now talking about, which is, prosecuting, judging GNRD through the media. That's what is happening now. So to avoid that, we need independent media self-regulatory body. Does that exist? Can civilians or civil society organizations who are offended go there as a recourse? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brandt, perhaps?
Thank you. We have a controlling organization for the press in Norway, of course. And they can handle, and they do handle, complaints, but I don't think in this case that would solve any problem. There have been defamation of GNRD in the press, not accusation, but they have established, more or less established the fact that they are guilty. If you are accused of something, then you are guilty of at least something. No smoke without the fire. So the defamation is very clear, and we have of course discussed what we should do about it. We can make a complaint. That is possible. The outcome you can never be certain of, you can never tell. But the problem is what I said, that the Norwegian press is hunting in as a pack. You don't have a critical voice within the press itself. We have discussed with journalists, we have said that you have to look into that and that side of the issue, and they are not interested because they follow the trace of blood.
So do you say that there is a partisan press in Norway, which means that they have accused, prosecuted, and judged GNRD through the media?
In reality, I think that it's a strong statement, but it's correct.
Yeah, because the reason I'm saying is because in Africa, we say instead of going to the court, politicians use the media, to eliminate their opponents. Okay, And that's where they level accusations, continue with the prosecution, and then, like you are saying now, there is judgment that the media has already reached a conclusion instead of the two sides of history.
So,
Yes, I don't think that was a question, that was more or less a statement.
so perhaps another question, yes?
Thank you so much, Moderator. Mine is not a question per se, but I think it's just a statement. First, to express our disappointment. In our, where I come from, when you are highly respected and you start losing your credibility, it's more embarrassing than a person whose credibility is at a lower level and you start climbing slowly. I've been chairing the Africa-EU NGO process and also the Africa-EU human rights process. What I discovered, and I think this is the fate that the GNRD is facing, it is in black and white in the EU that civil society in the European Union are an extension of the EU foreign policy. So, the EU countries and countries in the West are in a comfort zone. Their organized civil society never criticized them because they are an extension of foreign policy and therefore they're supposed to operate outside that space. And I have worked with so many organizations within this process that have, at one particular time, maybe said a word that the EU is not happy about, and the next time, the following day, they are kicked out from the list of funding. And I think GNRD's fate is as a result of talking about Norway inside nowhere. You know, and to them, it violates the unwritten rule that you are supposed to go out there and speak on behalf of us. Now, for Africa, I tell you, this is the most disappointing and embarrassing situation. I don't think Norway will ever have respect from now onwards in my continent as a result of this action. They have pushed a lot of agendas on the continent, while they then themselves are doing what they, at a level 3-4 times more than what Africa has been. We have been a subject of criticism, violations, poverty, and they have projected themselves as the heaven of heaven, or even below, above the peace that exists in heaven. But the truth is now dawning. Unless it moves very quickly, unless the Norwegians themselves rise to the occasion to defend their values that we have known them for, to defend the principles that has made Norway citizens have the respect when you interact with them, their government and the institution of governance are misrepresenting them. And it is good that I'm seated in front of you, I know it, and I think 6 months from now, if I met with you, I would not even want to give you an ear, if I have to be honest. Because I am coming from a background in a continent where we have gone through challenges and we are moving. And while we are climbing up the ladder, and I find you on the way and you are coming up the ladder, going where I'm coming from. The interjection, to me, you don't add value anymore in this process. I think the Norwegians themselves must rise to the occasion and say the institution of governance are misrepresenting them, their credibility is at its lowest, and that they should put a stop to this. There are so many countries in Europe, For example, I have been asking, do you have NGOs of society in Poland? I asked one minister in a meeting, do you have NGO in Poland? I was sitting on a board, I had just to resign, a board of an international NGO in the United Kingdom. Every 1 month, what do you call them, the company, what? Is it the company? They are asking me to tell them every time, you know, even when I'm traveling for a board meeting, so many questions. And I told them I come from a country where I'm more peaceful and I'm not interested where I'm going. If it was not for work, I would not even come there. But what we are trying to say is that Europe is getting exposed. And Norway is the starting point. Unless you move quickly to stop this, Europe may revert to where Africa is coming from. And that would be the saddest situation. I thank you.
Thank you very much for these comments. Any other question? Any other comments? So perhaps, do you want to have a little conclusion from your side?
Yeah, let's a few words maybe. I would say that we should not be despondent about what is happening to GNRD. It's a very unique case in the sense that an organization that is operating outside that country has come under attack by that particular country. But I'm pretty much hopeful that somehow the Norwegian officials, particularly the top tier leadership, would realize the futility of this case. And also I would endorse what our brother has just said about his involvement with the European Union and other NGOs. Perhaps there is an implied racism also visible in the rejection or in the opposition of GNRD, because it has stood up for, it has taken up an agenda that the Westerns thought was their monopoly. And also because it's people from down south. So the tendency is to look down upon them. And perhaps this bias has also led to led the officials now to go after this. But I guess that somehow this will fizzle out very soon, and that the law will take course rather sooner than later, not 10 years as some of you may suspect or expect. Our hope lies still in the rule of law, and if we continue making noises about it, perhaps the day will belong to GNRD, and GNRD will come clean out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brandt?
Thank you. I would like to make a comment on my friend from Africa's comment on the situation in Norway. Norway has in this case been exposed for bad governance and for the breach of the rule of law. For me, as I try to say, this is not a new situation or a unique situation. So in my point of view, it's good that the fault of the Norwegian system has been exposed. And it's good that it has been exposed internationally. Because when it's only exposed internally, it's very difficult to get someone to do something with it. When it's exposed internationally, it's a hope that the pressure and exposure in itself may help on the situation, may help Norway to get better governance and to establish a better rule of law within Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As conclusion, general conclusion, the good governance is not so easy to attempt as you demonstrated this evening. It is a sort of dream, faraway haven, a perfect society where human rights organizations will not have no more place. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your coming, thank you for your questions, and I propose to you to go back to work because we must attempt this good governance. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.